What do equity, access, diversity and inclusion have to do with computing?
To know your learners and don't make any assumptions.
To have a heart for your students and seeing what they're good at and giving them an opportunity to be good at it.
Welcome to Hello World, a podcast for educators interested in computing and digital making. I'm Carrie-Anne Philbin, a computing content creator for the Raspberry Pi Foundation, currently leading the development of the Teach Computing curriculum, and I'm a passionate advocate for computing for all.
And I'm James Robinson, a computing educator, and I'm working on projects that promote effective pedagogy within our subject. I too want to see all learners have the access and meaningful opportunities to experience our amazing subject. If you want to support our show, then subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a 5-star review.
Today, we're asking, what do equity, access, diversity and inclusion have to do with computing? It's no secret that the field of computer science is lacking in diversity. When we look at the number of diverse people entering the STEM workforce and contrast them to the number of students in school education who lack access or opportunity to take a computer science course, the pipeline problem is clear. So, what can educators do to change the status quo?
Well, I think, Carrie-Anne, there's lots of things that educators can do. And I think the first and most important step is recognising and understanding the barriers that many young people and learners face when trying to engage with computing in a meaningful and interesting and engaging kind of way. I think that's a really, first and foremost, that's a really important thing. And I think in reflecting upon that, we can think about how we might address our biases that we might have, consciously or unconsciously, and address where those biases, where they're present perhaps in our content or the examples that we give in our lessons or the role models that we present to our learners. And then I think there's also something about inclusive practices, making sure that the way we deliver is as inclusive to all learners as possible. When we think about the universal design for learning, which is a principle which suggests that we design our learning to cater for all learners' needs. But then there's also something there, I think, about cultural relevance and responsive pedagogy, building content that actually sort of reflects the diverse range of cultural experiences that our students have. When reflecting on this, educators might feel that a lot of these are really big systemic changes that need to happen, but actually just pausing and reflecting on the things that we can achieve as individuals is a really important step that we can all take. Finally, you mentioned access at the beginning there, and I think one really kind of interesting thing that's happened over the last few years is that the context of COVID and the sort of the focus on the BLM movement over the last couple of years has really raised awareness of a lot of these issues for different groups of students. But it's also, we've seen lots of initiatives from governments and organisations who have acted to support schools and learners in very practical ways, such as the government's laptop for schools here in the UK and a Raspberry Pi programme that we ran last year, which was called Learn at Home, where we distributed kit to lots of learners out there to support home learning.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about kind of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement sort of raising awareness. I think they've done more than that. I think they've really pushed us all to reflect on what is happening around us, in a really open way, in a way we've had to really challenge ourselves. And I think that it can only be good for society. And I think access for me is about all the things that you've talked about. But it's also more than just access to technology, as in, does a young person have access to a computer that they can both use for their learning, but also create technology with, tinker with, perhaps break? That's kind of one idea of access. But do they also have access to expertise and role models, either through their teachers or their parents or their community? Or do they also have access to opportunities? So is there curriculum time devoted to it in wherever they are, or if it's not part of their curriculum, are there other opportunities like after school clubs or hackathons, or are there other opportunities to have access to computer science? Does that sound that's kind of my reflection on the access part and of equity?
I think it's really important to pick up on that. I think I think technology in itself is a big enough challenge, but actually it's not sufficient it's not all about just giving our learners access to technology. It is about a wider kind of holistic offer. I think that's a really important point.
Giving students an opportunity to experience computer science is a personal mission for our special guest, Yolanda Payne, a research associate at the Georgia Institute of Technology and a fellow at the Constellation Centre for Equity in Computing. She facilitates a Code Club and Girls Who Code chapter while still finding time to tinker at home with her 2 sons. Yolanda, why is access to computer science for all so important?
So for me, because I always grew up with computers, because my parents saw the importance of computers in our home, I didn't realize that other students didn't have that opportunity until I, go to school and I can do these technical things that usually boys were doing, because my stepfather, he was always like, you're going to do this and you're going to learn how to do this. And so I didn't realize how many students didn't have that opportunity. And now as an adult, I realize what a sacrifice it was for my parents to even give me those opportunities. And working in schools where poverty is, I've often worked in Title I schools here in the States. And so that meant a majority of our students were in situations of poverty. And I realized that my parents had given me a gift that it was a sacrifice of their money, of their time, that many parents, hardworking parents, just can't afford to do for their kids. And when you look at the way technology is impacting our society today, if students aren't a part of this age and actively producing in this, then they're missing out on opportunities. And so for me, that's where my passion lies. That's where it's come from. Just giving students an opportunity to see if they like this, if they're good at it, and even being exposed to it, it gives them more of a foothold into today's society, economy, just all aspects of our culture.
Also joining us today is former computing teacher and head of computing Beverly Clark, who now works for BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. She is the National Community Manager for Computing at School and Networking Community for Computing Teachers and Educators in the UK. Why is access to computer science for all so important?
First of all, Carrie Ann and James, thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me to join you on this podcast. I'd say that my motivation for all of this comes from a very personal space and a lived experience. So I'm think back to 12-year-old me, that age when you're starting secondary school, and I didn't have access to a computer. So, I mean, it's quite a way back, but there were no computers where I grew up. I grew up in a different country up until the age of 15, and there just weren't computers. So when I speak to my colleagues and people of my age group who've grown up with computers, there's a very different experience, okay? But so that personal experience, it's helped me to understand when you've got access to technology, the difference it can make to you as a person, a community, and ultimately the country. So there's that whole economic issue that comes alongside the access for everyone. So since the age of 12, I've been into computers and I've really, got to grips with them. And it's always stayed with me, the difference that understanding what tech can do for me and others is all about. And I've also observed the digital divide, and it's something I'm really, really big about. So, we're aware of the digital divide, and we talk about devices and connectivity and things like that. And I've also got an interest in artificial intelligence, and I've started to notice the data divide emerging. So people who have access to the data, the ones that are more powerful, if we put that in quotations now, because they are actually able to manipulate that data for different purposes. So I'm really more interested now in the different communities actually harnessing technology and actually understanding how it works for them, because this is a really, really big issue. And I've also noticed that through my role here with computing at school, that one of the issues that the pandemic brought about was that we found here in England that some learners did have access to devices, be that a phone, a computer, a tablet. However, there was that issue with no broadband access. So there's so many different issues that start coming up. So, the teachers were running around trying to find dongles and get connectivity for students. So you may get a class of 30 and they may all have devices, but then they're just two without that connectivity. So that's, the barrier there. There are many challenges being faced here in the UK, in England particularly, as I've noticed, and also I think about my own lived-in experience.
I think it's really interesting, Beverly, there that you kind of identify a number of other kind of barriers, but also that really interesting kind of issue of power in inverted commas. That because we see technology as an enabler of young people in terms of their sort of prospects and opportunities for the future, that this access it disenfranchises and kind of it takes away the ability to kind of interact with society from certain individuals. And I think that point around data, hardware, connectivity, these are all different types of barriers that sort of take that power away and that ability to contribute. And I think that there are probably a myriad of other kind of challenges that we probably haven't identified here that exist that are similarly, barriers for our young learners. In the UK, what are we doing to kind of tackle that? What's the work of computing at school, and what are we doing to kind of address some of these challenges?
So we're doing quite a lot to support our teachers, and then we'll have that impact upon our students. So I'll start off with what we're doing to support our teachers. So computing at school is effectively communities of practice. So to people who are interested in computing education, who've literally just held their hands up and said, you know what, I'd like to network with others locally and to improve computing education within my setting, within my community. And then, that just mushrooms out, and that's, a whole country when you get to it. So there are these communities of practice across the country, across the United Kingdom. Within CAS, we've also got working groups. So that's even further special interest. And we've got a group called CAS Include. So the CAS Include working group looks at diversity and inclusion. So, this is about cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, SEN, neurodiversity, all types of different diversity that we do need to acknowledge and understand that each and every single one of us is different, but together we bring so much. And when we recognize, understand, respect our differences, that really makes for a very rich environment, rich conversations. We also docking to a massive organization, although it's a virtual entity, called the National Centre for Computing Education, the NCCE. It's government funded with a 4-year plan to improve and upskill teachers. So there's training available free of charge in many instances for teachers from the primary stages all the way through to secondary stages. And of course, we've got the CAS community supporting there and helping teachers to network and take that knowledge that they've gained from those NCC courses and to actually put it into practice.
And you recently ran, I think, was it CAS Inspire? Was there a big series of events that you ran recently? And one of the topics that I happened to be around for was one around kind of how do we get more representation from girls and young women in computing. What's the sort of the idea behind CAS Inspire, and how do you see that potentially supporting the equity agenda?
So there were sessions about getting girls into computing, for example, and we do feature that quite a lot, looking at different settings perhaps in which girls excel, projects that girls may excel with more than boys, so real world settings and applying their skills and thought to projects. And so there's, we get different experts in the field to come and impart the knowledge and what's new and current so the teachers can improve their practice and their knowledge there. Something else that we do to support educators is we've got this concept of a CAS in a box. So we've got a variety of those people I mentioned who hold their hands up locally and say, I'm going to run a CAS community. Those are effectively our CAS community leaders, our volunteer community, and we wouldn't be anywhere as CAS without a volunteer community. I was a volunteer when I was teaching because I really live and breathe and understand why it's so important to network with others. So the CAS in a Box resources are there to support community leaders with talking about these really, really important issues with their local communities. So, for example, we've got a box on gender, which looks at things like self belief, the setting in which you're in, role models. There's information presented, and then there's also discussion to facilitate discussions with the group of teachers and to share their experience. These send boxes give educators guidance on things such as establishing routines for some of your learners, depending upon what need those learners have, reducing a cognitive load that learners may experience with, some topics around ethnicity. I actually took the lead in writing being the writer box around ethnicity because of thinking about role models and also reflecting upon my own teaching and my own experiences and who were the role models. There weren't any. I didn't actively use any ethnically diverse role models in my teaching. And to be quite honest, I find it quite a challenge to do the box. I spoke to lots of people and we kept coming up with answers such as, we don't know. Who is this person? Who could we use? And so, there's a lot of research still needed in this area to highlight who people are. It isn't that people don't exist. We have to think about issues that have occurred in the past through colonialization and colonization and the impact that each and every one of us still feel, inventions not being recorded by certain peoples and things like that, that it can appear as if there are no inventors, there's no creators of certain communities, and that's just simply not true.
And Yolanda, do you want to add something there?
Everything that Beverly is saying is multiplied times 50 here in the States. And so what we have found is that there are pockets of resources. Often teachers don't know about them, don't have access to them. And it's not that people are intentionally doing these things, but if you're not in these, if you're not a part of an ethnic group or a racial group, or just a part of different groups, you don't often see outside of that. But when you're working with students and they never see themselves represented, it does something to that person, And so we were using a program, and one of the students said, "Well, why aren't there any Black female characters?" And as Beverly said, up until that time, I'd never thought about it. I would just choose one, modify it, and then that was fine. But just the lack of inclusion, even that sends a message.
100%, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it comes back to that idea that you've talked about access and opportunity. And I think tips for teachers, I think you've hit on a really good, tangible one there, which is in your body of resources, make sure that there are assets that young people can use that reflect who they are. So I have a question for both of you, Beverly and Yolanda. Educators listening to this podcast, what are kind of your top tips for that they could go and implement sort of immediately? What is something you would like them to do? I guess the first thing is for them to reflect on their own practice, but then what are the steps that they could take or the things that they could implement straight away to be making a positive impact in this area?
So I've been reflecting on this for some time, and I'd say my headline would be to know your learners and don't make any assumptions. Don't assume that, say, for example, if you've got a class of white children, that the child that's non-white, for example, necessarily knows something about another culture. It's the same culture. We're all in the same culture here. Don't say to a child, that perhaps appears visually different, "Oh, what can you say on this topic?" Because that is an inappropriate question. That does happen. It happens so frequently. Where do they live in relation to the school? Then understand any cultural differences, any religious differences. Just to listen to them, and that could come out quite easily. It's not something you have to ask explicitly, but when you set work, actually read what they write and start relating to your learners. I'd also say use relevant examples. So, sometimes, we tend to use things like I'll give example fruits, apples, pears, just fruits that you'll find necessarily in one country, but students who've got ethnically diverse background, they will be aware of other foods. Students who've got a parent or a grandparent from another country. So encourage that sharing of different examples, and always in a respectful way. And role models. Role models are very important, and they should be threaded through seamlessly. The number of schools I've been into where we've got display boards, and yes, we're interested in the history of and people who have passed before us, but we also need these living, everyday role models. And one of the things that I've got in the CAS in a box on ethnic diversity is taking a look at your curriculum, your specification, and thinking about the role models that you use for each topic. Just go through in a first pass, write down the role models, then go through in a second pass, look at, is it gender balance? Do you have different races and cultures and all of that? You are improving your lesson and giving a richer experience. And above all, I'd say being relatable, being someone that other people feel they like to share with, because if you're talking about something that's, near and dear to your heart, you don't want to think anyone is going to laugh at you or think of you different. You just need to be relatable. Here also, this whole concept around culturally responsive pedagogy, that's really important. And having a look at that in a lot more detail, there's a lot of writings out there around culturally responsive pedagogy.
So Beverly hit on the majority of things that I would have said. Like, I can sit here and listen to her all day. But again, the biggest thing that I would say is to have a heart for your students, whether they are children or adults, and realize that everyone brings in different experiences. And so to constantly give an opportunity for your students to share, I tell teachers those first couple of weeks of school are really important in building a community. The standards that you have, the lessons that you have, they will all be there. You will not get the same results if you don't invest into the community. As Beverly said, giving your students an opportunity to share, they will tell you anything that you ask, and they will show you things if you take the time to look at it. And that's important not only in the core areas, but also in computer science. You'd be surprised at the funds of knowledge, the wealth of knowledge our students are bringing into the classroom that are never tapped into because no one takes the time to ask a simple question of them.
Agreeing with what Yolanda has said there also, and also to share some of there's the National Education Union here is also, in addition to Raspberry Pi Foundation, published a small paper on culturally responsive teaching. So I'd say, that's another resource to tap into. And we've spoken about ethnic diversity. Gender diversity is also important. And I'll share an example from my teaching days when, the curriculum didn't require a computer to be open, but I thought, well, to enrich the experience of my learners, they actually need to see what's inside this box that they're using. So I said, right, let's get some old computers in and open them up. And so I gathered my class around, and I'll never forget a young man said to me, "Miss, are you okay?" I said, yes, I'm okay. And he goes, "Are you really okay?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Is there a problem?" And he said, "Miss, but you're a woman and you've got a screwdriver and you're going to open that." And at first I thought, "Oh, what is this? Is this some sort of joke to derail the lesson?" And you know what? It wasn't. He had genuine concern that I needed help to basically continue any further with this screwdriver and opening this box. I'd like to think in that moment he learned something about gender. Because, I'd stood in front of him for years. So ethnically, he knew who I was. It's visible. But he didn't think of me as a woman then doing something which clearly in his head, he's aged about 14, thought, that's very male. Should she be doing that? And it's really interesting. So role models and seeing people doing a whole load of different things, it's really, really important.
And Raspberry Pi Foundation, in fact, we've just published lots of information around that exact topic. So do check out raspberrypi.org, and we'll put some links in the show notes. So Yolanda, it's kind of same question really. Like, what are your kind of top tips for teachers to sort of implement sort of as soon as possible?
Oh yes, absolutely. And so for us, here in Georgia, we're now, there's a law where every middle school and high school is going to have to implement a computer science course by next year. And we're already looking at how is that going to be done equitably and inequitably, because there's already schools that are doing it, and then there's schools that this is going to be a struggle for. And so for me, being a Black female in a classroom, not afraid to pick up a screwdriver, not afraid to take apart a computer, not afraid to do things, I think that was one of the biggest catalysts for my girls to see. And when I say my girls, I mean my students in my code club, because once you're in my code club, you're mine. And so um, they seeing me do that and just forging through, I think that gave them more confidence to do different things. And a lot of times I would make them take the lead on things and then show other students. And so in doing that, that boosted their confidence. I was right there in the classroom with them, and I was willing to learn with them. But I have to say, it was always white male teachers that noticed my passion for technology and encouraged me. And so, it's not a matter of just seeing someone that looks like you. It's a matter of seeing your students and seeing what they're good at and giving them an opportunity to be good at it.
That sounds really interesting. I think that they've both those collection of tips are really fascinating, and it's interesting how you both spoke about the importance of that sort of personability, the approachability, those listening skills, and making sure that you really understand the needs and experiences of your student. I was just thinking about sort of addressing the kind of the white male teacher being of that kind of persuasion, and I was curious. Like, I think sometimes as someone in that position who has had a relatively privileged sort of experience of computing and access to computing, what are the things that people in my position who are really want to do the best for their students, what are the kind of things that they can do to make sure that they're providing opportunities and encouragement, and really be an advocate in this space?
If you notice someone is good at something, even just making that statement, that right there, you be surprised at how far that goes. For instance, I got into my graduate program because the instructor said, his name is Eddie Hennett. He said, Dr. Eddie Hennett, he said, Yolanda, you're really good at this. Did you know that there's a degree over at Mississippi State in this area? I had no clue. There was a whole degree that I could do something that I thought was just fun. And so just that one word of encouragement put me on just a totally different path. And so just acknowledging what you see in students can give them, you'll never know if that one word of encouragement is the thing that sticks in a 12-year-old's mind, even if everything else around them is saying, no, 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 you can't do that. You being that one person that saw that one thing at that moment might change the direction of their lives.
I mean, everything you say just resonates so much with my own experience. I think the reason why I have so much passion for computing education, computer science as a subject and discipline is just thanks to my parents, right? My dad, I come from a really kind of poor working class background here in England. My parents did not have access to university education. My dad was very quick to, as someone who is a heating engineer and a plumber, he's was always my whole life sort of playing around with technology and different tools and so on. So we were really lucky that he brought home a sort of device. He brought home a Commodore 64 when I was very young, and I would sit with him and I would play with it. And all I know, I can kind of work backwards, but all of my passion comes from that experience, and also my school having just one BBC microcomputer, which if you were good at maths and you had completed all of your maths work, you were allowed to have a go at. So I was kind of in that bubble of someone who was allowed to mess around with Logos. So what you're saying really resonates, but no one else around me, or I didn't have access to experts. I didn't have access to people who would support me. But I was lucky enough to have that access to technology. So whenever I hear you talk about this, I always just feel a lot of connectivity with you because I have a similar sort of story. It would be really great if we got to a point in society where everyone didn't have that origin story. I want to get to a point where young people say, oh, I went to a co-club, or I had this amazing teacher, or it was on the curriculum, or do you know what I mean? I want to get to that point, and we're not quite there yet. That's my dream. But just it would be good to hear from your perspective in your location, kind of what are the barriers really for access for young people to computing education?
So just what Yolanda's just said there has totally resonated with me. So my GCSE and A-level years, my teacher was a white male. So that's Mr. McNulty, and he was absolutely fantastic. I still find myself thinking today, well, where is he? What did he do? Did he know the impact he had upon me? And by the time I did my A-levels, we're just a class of 5 girls. And, if memory serves me correct, one of those was non-white, but he encouraged and he showed the way. And where I went to university in London, it was very mixed. And I do remember in my industrial placement, I worked for the Met Police, and I went to a department which was all male, but there was encouragement there, okay? And I do remember my manager at the time saying, right, he's got a young student in, come with me, Beverly. Do you know anything about networks? And I didn't. And he said, let me show you. Novell Networks is what it was at the time. He said, when you leave university, you put this on your CV, you will get a job. He was absolutely spot on. So that encouragement is really important. Not writing anyone off based on any sort of bias or whatever, but just encouraging that person to get involved and be a participatory citizen. And something else that Yolanda said is about learning alongside your students. So, you're making mistakes with them. You're opening the box also, you may not know which screws to unscrew first of all, but just really getting stuck in and them seeing you as human. And, James, you're saying, what can you do? Is that being relatable, encouraging, and also accepting, there's some things I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. So I think that's really, really important.
That all really resonates with me, and I think I remember in my my early 20s, kind of reflecting on my teenage years and kind of thinking it's such a shame that my school didn't offer computer science, and I didn't have those same experiences that my peers at university had. But actually reflecting on it now, I look back and I think actually I was in a very privileged position. I had that device that my parents sort of scrimped and saved to buy at a young age. I had school teachers that encouraged me and allowed me to essentially break computers. But so I had all those opportunities, and actually it gave me the curiosity and self motivation to go and seek those answers and those challenges and those opportunities. So yeah, it's really kind of interesting to kind of reflect on these sort of overlapping origin stories about and how transformational a device can be.
But that's the thing, right? I think if we're thinking about equity and opportunity, it's not just devices. If we reflect back on our experience, it's not just devices, it's also the opportunity of access to resource, whether that resource is expertise or role models, or it's curriculum time, dedicated time, a space in school where you're able to have that opportunity, whether that's just a club or it's, formally as part of your school day. Those are access areas in which we need to make sure everybody has that opportunity.
So my final question to Yolanda is, I think if we were to think in practical terms about an equitable classroom and knowing that we'd reach that kind of that place, that kind of goal that we're trying to reach, what does that equitable classroom look like in your view?
So an equitable classroom, in my view, is a classroom where every student knows what their part of the puzzle is. And so for me, tying it back to computer science, everyone's not going to be a coder, but there are so many different roles associated with technology, with computer science that can be tied into other content areas. If in an equitable, in a classroom where equity is being shown, it would be every student knowing themselves and where they can contribute.
We asked you, our audience, for your thoughts via social media on what equity in computer science education means to you in practice. Computing from St John's College said, I like to think of computing at Key Stage 3, which is ages between 11 and 13, as an experience, a chance to try out and see the variety of uses computer science has. Use a varied curriculum and plenty of cross-curricular contexts.
And our friend Alan Harrison also said that he finds often that his girls lack confidence, which stops them choosing the subject at Key Stage 4, which is our kind of age 14 to 16. And so that Key Stage 3 period that Carrie Ann's just mentioned is really important to build praise and confidence, and also to use that time to kind of to demonstrate representation through our role models and so on. So that's a really good point. And I think it's not without its challenges. Mrs. Mousy on Twitter said, in practice, computing needs buy-in from school senior leaders and needs to be seen as relevant to all and giving students the opportunity to explore and find out what engages them.
And Rebecca Franks also responded with providing opportunities for learners to see the variety that the subject has to offer, allowing the students to see an aspect that is for them. And finally, Nick Kelsey says, very much agree about everyone having the opportunity to access the subject. This is crucial, not just for students, but for the productivity of the UK and beyond. My thanks to Yolanda Payne and Beverly Clark for sharing their experience with us today and for all their efforts in raising the profile of diversity and inclusion in computing education. We need more people like them. You can read their articles on this topic in issues 11 and 14 of Hello World magazine. If you have a question for us or a comment about our discussion today, then you can email via podcast@helloworld.cc or you can tweet us at helloworld_edu. So James, it's been a bumper episode today. What did we learn?
So much. I think, first and foremost, there are so many challenges here. So many big challenges, but there are so many things that teachers can do. And I think that point about being relatable, approachable, and knowing your students is the biggest difference that I think our educators can make. How about you?
Well, I'm going to continue to wield my screwdriver in the faces of many people and to demonstrate that computer science is for everyone.